They called her a witch, but she was the one who saved them all. Have you ever been afraid of someone just because they were different? Have you ever whispered about a neighbor, crossed the street to avoid a stranger, or believed the worst about someone without knowing their story? This is a tale about fear, the kind that lives in our hearts and grows in the darkness of ignorance. It's about a woman named Clara who lived among people but never belonged to them. They called her terrible names. They said she danced with shadows and brewed storms in teacups. They said her eyes could curse you and her touch could wither crops. But when death came knocking at every door, when mothers wept and children fell silent, when the strongest men could do nothing but watch their loved ones fade away, it was Clara, the woman they despised, who held the keys to salvation. Sometimes the person we fear the most is the one we need the most. This is her story. If you're ready to discover what really happened in the small town of Millbrook, please like this story, leave a comment with your thoughts, subscribe for more tales that touch the heart, and hit that bell so you never miss a story that matters. Clara Jensen lived in the grey house at the end of Thornfield Lane, where the road turned to dirt and the trees grew so thick they blocked out the afternoon sun. The house had belonged to her grandmother, and her grandmother's mother before that. It sagged in the middle like a sigh, with shutters that creaked even when there was no wind. She was 32 years old, with hair the color of October leaves and eyes so pale they looked like morning fog. She wore her grandmother's shawl, a patchwork of purple and deep blue that caught the light strangely, as if it held tiny stars. The people of Millbrook didn't like Clara. Stay away from that house, mothers told their children, pulling them close when they walked past Thornfield Lane. She's not right, the men muttered at Bernie's hardware store, shaking their heads. Seen her talking to herself in the garden. Seen lights in her windows at midnight. My tomatoes died right after she looked at them, old Mrs. Patterson swore at the Sunday market. Just shriveled up the next day. The truth was simpler and sadder than their stories. Clara talked to herself because she was lonely. The lights burned late because she read books, dozens of them, about plants and healing and the old ways her grandmother had taught her. And Mrs. Patterson's tomatoes died because she overwatered them, just like she did every year. But fear doesn't need facts. Fear feeds on whispers and shadows and the things we don't understand. Clara knew what they said about her. She heard which is behind her back at the post office. She saw mothers grab their children's hands and hurry away when she walked down Main Street. She felt the weight of their stares, heavy as stones. It hurt. Every single time, it hurt. But Clara had learned long ago that trying to prove yourself to people who've already made up their minds is like trying to hold water in your bare hands. So she stopped trying. She kept to herself, tended her garden, and helped a few who were brave enough, or desperate enough, to knock on her door. Because Clara had a gift. She could look at a person and see what ailed them, not with magic, but with knowledge passed down through generations. She knew which herbs eased headaches, which roots settled stomachs, which teas brought down fevers. Her grandmother had taught her, and her grandmother's mother had taught before that, in a time when this knowledge was respected, not feared. Knowledge is power, her grandmother had told her on her deathbed, pressing a worn leather journal into Clara's hands. But people fear power they don't have. Remember that, child. And be kind anyway. So when Thomas Reed came knocking at midnight with his daughter burning up with fever, Clara didn't turn him away, even though he'd called her a witch just last week at the town meeting. Please, it begged, tears streaming down his weathered face. The doctor's gone to the city. My Emma, she's only 6. Please. Clara had brewed willowback tea, made cool compresses, and stayed with little Emma until dawn broke and the fever finally released its grip. Thomas had left without even thanking her, his shame making him angry. By noon the next day, he was telling people at the diner that Emma got better on her own. That woman had nothing to do with it, he insisted, too loud, trying to convince himself. Clara heard about it. She said nothing. Emma was alive. That was enough, but not everyone was like Thomas Reed. Grace Martinez, who ran the flower shop on Pine Street, came to Clara's door one autumn morning with tears in her eyes and a wilting plant in her hands. "It's all I have left of her, and it's dying. I've tried everything." Clara examined the orchid carefully, touching its leaves with gentle fingers. "It needs indirect light," she said softly. "And you're loving it too much water. Plants need space to breathe, just like people." She reported the orchid, showed Grace exactly where to place it in her shop, and wrote down simple care instructions. 3 weeks later, the orchid bloomed, delicate pink flowers that made Grace cry all over again, but this time with joy. Grace became Clara's friend. The only real friend she had in Millbrook. "I don't understand them," Grace said one afternoon, sitting in Clara's kitchen drinking mint tea. "You've never done anything but help people." "People are scared of what they don't understand," Clara replied, staring into her cup. "And it's easier to hate than to admit you might be wrong." "That's not fair." "No," Clara agreed quietly. "It's not." The seasons turned. Clara's garden grew lush with foxglove and feverfew, chamomile and calendula, sage and Solomon's seal. She harvested by moonlight because the plants were strongest then, or so her grandmother had taught her. But to the people of Millbrook, a woman in a garden at midnight was just more proof of her dark nature. "She's casting spells," they whispered. "Summoning things," they insisted. "No good can come from that house," they agreed. And then, on a cold March morning when the world still smelled like winter, everything changed. It started with the Holloway family. 10-year-old Jake Holloway came home from school with a headache. By dinner, he was vomiting. By midnight, he was covered in dark spots and burning with fever so high his mother screamed for his father to call the ambulance. At the hospital in the city, 30 miles away, the doctors looked worried. "We are seeing more cases like this," Dr. Chen told Jake's parents, his face grim. "We don't know what it is yet. Some kind of infection, aggressive and fast-moving. We are running tests." While they waited for answers, more children got sick. Sarah Kim. Marcus Thompson. Little Emma Reed, yes, the same Emma that Clara had helped years before. 8 children in 3 days, all with the same symptoms: fever, dark spots spreading across their skin like spilled ink, violent sickness, and a cough that sounded like breaking glass. The hospital was overwhelmed. The doctors had no answers. The tests showed nothing they recognized. "It might be viral," they said. "Or bacterial," they guessed. "We are trying broad-spectrum antibiotics," they promised. But the children kept getting worse. And then the first child died. Marcus Thompson, age 7, who loved dinosaurs and wanted to be a paleontologist. He slipped away on a Tuesday morning while his mother held his hand and prayed to a God who seemed very far away. Millbrook had never known such grief. The town meeting hall was packed that evening, standing room only. Mayor Collins stood at the podium, his face gray with exhaustion and fear. "The CDC is sending a team," he announced. "They'll be here in 2 days. In the meantime, Dr. Chen recommends we keep our children home from school, avoid public gatherings, and—" "What about Clara Jensen?" someone shouted from the back. The room went silent. "What about her?" Mayor Collins asked carefully. "She did this." It was Mrs. Patterson, standing up with her face flushed red. "This is her doing. She's been brewing God knows what in that house, and now our children are dying." "Now hold on," the mayor started. "She's a witch," someone else yelled. "She cursed us. My grandmother warned us about people like her." The fear in the room was electric, dangerous. It needed somewhere to go, something to blame. And Clara, already living on the edges of their community, was an easy target. Grace Martinez stood up, her voice shaking but determined. "That's insane. Clara has never hurt anyone. She's helped more people in this town than any of you want to admit." "Sit down, Grace," Mr. Holloway growled. His son Jake was in the hospital, getting worse by the hour. You don't have kids. You don't understand. I understand that fear makes people stupid. Grace shot back. Clara didn't cause this. But her voice was drowned out by the rising anger, the desperate need to blame someone, anyone, for the horror that was consuming their children. That night, someone threw a rock through Clara's front window. She stood in her living room, staring at the shattered glass scattered across her grandmother's rug, and felt something break inside her too. The note wrapped around the rock was simple: live or burn. Grace came over within the hour, having heard what happened. You should go to the police, she urged, helping Clara sweep up the glass. And tell them what? Clara asked tiredly. That the whole town hates me. They already know, Grace. They've always known. This is different. They are threatening you. They are scared. Scared people do terrible things. That doesn't make it okay. No, Clara agreed, setting down the broom. But understanding it makes it easier to forgive. Grace stared at her friend. How are you not angry? Clara was quiet for a long moment, looking out through the broken window at the dark street beyond. I am angry, she said finally, so softly Grace almost didn't hear her. But I'm also sad. Because those children are dying, and everyone's so busy hating me that they're not looking for real answers. Do you? Grace hesitated. Do you know what's making them sick? No, Clara admitted. But I might be able to help them anyway. How? Clara went to her grandmother's bookshelf and pulled down the old leather journal. The one passed down through 4 generations of women who had healed when doctors could not. These remedies, she said, touching the yellowed pages with reverent fingers, they are old. Older than antibiotics, older than modern medicine. My grandmother said there were sicknesses in her time, strange fevers, strange spots, that the doctors couldn't cure. But these recipes. She trailed off, hope and fear warring in her pale eyes. You think you can cure them? Grace breathed. I don't know, Clara said honestly. But I have to try. Clara walked through the night. By candlelight, because it was easier on her tired eyes, she read through her grandmother's journal, cross-referencing symptoms with remedies, mixing theory with intuition with generations of accumulated wisdom. Black spots. High fever. Respiratory distress. Rapid onset. Her fingers stopped on a page yellowed with age, written in her great-great-grandmother's careful script. The spotted fever of 1918. Came on fast, took the children first. Doctors were useless. Mary Brennan's remedy saved 7 children in the township. Boil elderberry bark with. Clara's heart raced as she read the recipe. Elderberry bark, yarrow root, wild cherry bark, and 3 other ingredients she would need to gather from her garden and the woods beyond. But would anyone even let her try? She was still reading when the knock came at dawn, soft, hesitant, desperate. Clara opened the door to find Catherine Holloway standing on her porch, Jake's mother. The woman's eyes were swollen from crying, her clothes rumpled like she'd been wearing them for days. They stared at each other for a long, waited moment. My son is dying, Catherine finally said, her voice cracking. Jake is dying, and the doctors can't stop it. 3 more children died yesterday. The CDC team says they need more time. But we don't have more time. She took a shuddering breath. I called you a witch. To your face. Last year at the school board meeting. I remember, Clara said quietly. I'm sorry, Catherine whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. I'm so sorry. I was wrong. But please, if there's anything you can do, he's only 10. He wants to play baseball. He wants to learn to drive someday. He wants to grow up. She was sobbing now, her words barely coherent. Please. I'm begging you. Clara felt her own eyes burn with tears. She thought about all the times Catherine had crossed the street to avoid her, all the hateful looks, all the whispered warnings to keep children away from that woman. She thought about her grandmother's last words, "Be kind anyway." "Come in," Clara said, stepping aside. "Let me get my things." 20 minutes later, Clara stood in front of Millbrook Hospital with a basket of bottles and a heart pounding with fear. Catherine had driven her, both women silent during the 30-mile journey, bound together by hope and desperation. The hospital was chaos. Sick children filled the pediatric wing. Exhausted doctors and nurses moved like ghosts through the halls. The CDC team had set up in a conference room, surrounded by laptops and test tubes and grim faces. Dr. Chen met them at the nurses' station, his eyes red-rimmed with fatigue. "Catherine, I told you on the phone," he started. "This is Clara Jensen," Catherine interrupted. "She has remedies. Old remedies. I'm asking you to let her try." Dr. Chen looked at Clara, and she saw the war in his face, professional skepticism battling against the undeniable fact that modern medicine was failing these children. "What kind of remedies?" he asked cautiously. Clara set her basket on the counter and began pulling out bottles, explaining each one, listing ingredients, describing the historical precedents from her grandmother's journal. She spoke clearly and calmly, using medical terminology when she could, being honest about what she knew and what she could only hope. Dr. Chen listened. Really listened. "This is highly irregular," he said finally. "These treatments haven't been tested, haven't been approved." "My son is dying," Catherine said, her voice still wrapped in silk. "Right now. Today. You've tried everything else. What do we have to lose?" Dr. Chen looked at Clara again. "If I allow this, and something goes wrong, then blame me," Clara said simply. "But these children don't have time for clinical trials and FDA approval. I understand the risks. I'll take full responsibility." After what felt like a lifetime, Dr. Chen nodded slowly. "We'll start with the Holloway boy," he said. "But I'm monitoring everything, and if there's any sign of adverse reaction, we stop immediately." "Understood," Clara agreed. Jake Holloway looked so small in the hospital bed, drowning in white sheets, his skin covered in the terrible dark spots that had spread from his chest to his face. His breathing was shallow, labored. The machines around him beeped urgent warnings. Clara approached his bedside with a mixture of fear and determination. Catherine held her son's hand, whispering prayers that sounded more like pleas. "The first dose needs to be given slowly," Clara explained to the nurse, Dr. Chen watching from the doorway. "A quarter cup every 2 hours. It will taste bitter, the yarrow root, but it needs to be swallowed, not injected. The body has to process it naturally." The nurse looked to Dr. Chen, who nodded. They administered the first dose at 8 a.m. Jake grimaced at the taste but was too weak to protest. Clara showed them how to make a poultice for his chest, elderberry bark and yarrow mashed together, warm but not hot, to help with the respiratory distress. Then came the waiting. Clara sat in a chair in the corner of Jake's room, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes never leaving the boy's face. Catherine stayed too, and Dr. Chen checked in every hour, taking notes, monitoring vitals, his scientific mind at war with his desperate hope. By noon, Jake's fever hadn't worsened. It hadn't improved, but it hadn't worsened. "That's significant," Dr. Chen murmured, checking the chart. "Every other child has gotten progressively worse at this stage." By 2 p.m., after the second dose, Jake's breathing seemed slightly easier. The machine's urgent beeping had quieted to a steadier rhythm. "His oxygen levels are improving," the nurse reported, surprise evident in her voice. By 6 p.m., after the fourth dose, Jake opened his eyes. "Mom," he whispered, his voice rough as sandpaper. Catherine broke down, pressing her face to her son's hand, her shoulders shaking with sobs that were equal parts relief and residual terror. Dr. Chen stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the monitors, at Jake's glaring eyes, at the dark spots that seemed, impossibly, to be fading at their edges. "It's working," he breathed. "My God, it's actually working." He turned to Clara, who still sat in her corner chair, tears streaming silently down her face. "We need to give this to the other children," he said urgently. "Now. How much can you make?" Clara stood up, wiping her eyes, her voice steady despite her emotion. "As much as they need," she said. "But I'll need help. I'll need hands to harvest, to prepare, to brew. It takes time, and these children don't have much of it." "I'll help," Catherine said immediately, still holding Jake's hand but looking at Clara with something new in her eyes: respect, gratitude, shame for the past. "I'll call in every available staff member," Dr. Chen added. "You tell us what to do, and we'll do it." Word spread through the hospital like wildfire. The woman they called a witch was saving the children. By midnight, Clara had turned the hospital's cafeteria kitchen into a makeshift apothecary. Nurses and doctors followed her instructions, chopping roots, boiling bark, measuring precisely. Catherine walked beside Clara, learning the old ways, her hands steady now that her son was sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. Grace Martinez arrived at 2 a.m. with her car full of supplies she'd harvested from Clara's garden, using the detailed list Clara had given her over the phone. "The whole town knows what you're doing," Grace said, hugging her friend tightly. "They know you're saving the children." But Clara was too focused to care about redemption. There were 12 sick children in this hospital, and 3 more had been admitted since she arrived. Every moment mattered. By dawn the next day, all 15 children had received Clara's remedy. By noon, 13 of them were showing improvement, fevers breaking, breathing easier, the terrible spots beginning to fade. 2 children, Sarah Kim and a new patient named Bobby Chen, were still critical. Clara prepared stronger doses, adjusted the ratios, added an additional ingredient from her grandmother's notes: bloodroot, dangerous if used incorrectly but powerful against deep infections. "It's a risk," she told Dr. Chen honestly. "Too much can be toxic. But at this stage, they are dying anyway," Dr. Chen finished grimly. "Let's try it." Sarah improved within hours. Bobby took longer, fighting his way back from the edge with the kind of stubbornness only a 6-year-old can muster. By the 3rd day, every child was conscious, eating soft foods, asking for their parents, complaining about being bored, the most beautiful sound the hospital staff had ever heard. The CDC team was baffled and fascinated in equal measure. They took samples of Clara's remedy, interviewed her for hours, pored over her grandmother's journal, which she allowed them to photograph, though she kept the original. "This is remarkable," Dr. Sarah Mitchell from the CDC said, shaking her head in amazement. "The anti-inflammatory properties alone, and the way it targets the specific pathogen we've been unable to identify. Ms. Jensen, this could revolutionize treatments for similar infections." "It's not mine," Clara said quietly. "It belongs to my grandmother, and her mother, and all the women before them who kept this knowledge alive when the world forgot it. We'd like to study it further," Dr. Mitchell continued. "With your permission, of course. Properly test it, maybe develop a modern version." "As long as it helps people," Clara agreed. "That's all that matters." But while the CDC talked about studies and patents and medical journals, the people of Millbrook were dealing with a different kind of reckoning. The children came home. Jake Holloway walked through his front door on shaky legs, collapsed into his father's arms, and cried because he was alive and home and could smell his mom's cooking. Emma Reed hugged her little brother so tight he squeaked, both of them laughing through tears. Sarah Kim asked if she could still try out for the school play, even though she'd missed 2 weeks of rehearsal. And slowly, like a wave moving through Millbrook, the town began to understand what had happened. Who had saved their children when everyone else, doctors, medicine, prayers, had failed. The woman they called a witch. The woman they threatened. The woman whose window they'd shattered. The shame was heavy and thick, settling over Millbrook like fog. Mayor Collins called an emergency town meeting, but this time the hall was silent, subdued. Parents sat with their arms around children who should have died but didn't. The empty chairs where 3 families had sat, the Thompsons, whose son Marcus hadn't made it, and 2 other families whose children had died before Clara could reach them, were like open wounds in the room. "We need to talk about Clara Jensen," Mayor Collins began, his voice heavy. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Thomas Reed stood up, Emma's father, the same man who had denied Clara's help years ago, who had spread rumors, who had called her a witch to anyone who would listen. "I want to say something," he said, his voice cracking. "I was wrong. I was so damn wrong, and I'm sorry. Clara saved Emma once before, and I pretended it didn't happen because I was too proud to admit I'd needed help from someone I'd spent years hating." He looked around the room. "We all did that. We all looked at Clara and saw something to fear instead of someone to know. And when our children were dying, she came anyway. After everything we said, everything we did, she came anyway." Mrs. Patterson stood up next, tears streaming down her face. "I started the witch rumors," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Years ago, when my garden failed. I blamed her because it was easier than admitting I didn't know what I was doing. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." One by one, people stood. Confessing. Apologizing. Weeping for their shame and their children's lives and the grace they didn't deserve but had received anyway. "Where is Clara?" someone finally asked. "Still at the hospital," Grace Martinez answered from her seat. "She's monitoring the last 2 children. Making sure they're completely recovered before she leaves." "We should do something," Catherine Holloway said, standing with her husband's hand in hers. "Something more than sorry. Something that shows her, shows everyone, that we've learned." "What did you have in mind?" Mayor Collins asked. Catherine smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it was a real smile. "I have some ideas." Clara didn't know about the town meeting. She was too busy teaching the hospital staff how to prepare and store her remedies, writing down detailed instructions, making sure they could continue treatment without her if needed. "You should patent this," Dr. Chen suggested for the 3rd time. "Or at least publish. You could be famous." Clara shook her head with a small smile. "My grandmother never wanted fame. She wanted to help. That's enough for me." On her last day at the hospital, before she was set to return to Millbrook, each child came to say goodbye. They brought her pictures they'd drawn, thank you cards written in crayon and shaky handwriting, and hugs that squeezed the breath from her lungs. "Are you really a witch?" little Bobby Chen asked seriously, his 6-year-old eyes wide. Clara knelt down to his level, thinking carefully about her answer. "No, sweetheart," she said gently. "I'm just someone who knows about plants and old remedies. Your doctors are the real heroes, they work miracles every day with medicine and science." "But you saved us," Bobby insisted. "When they couldn't." "We saved you together," Clara corrected softly. "That's how it should be, old knowledge and new knowledge working together." Grace picked her up from the hospital for the drive home. As they got closer to Millbrook, Clara felt her chest tighten with anxiety. "What if they're still angry?" she asked quietly, voicing the fear she'd been holding for days. Grace just smiled mysteriously. "I don't think that's going to be a problem." When they turned onto Main Street, Clara gasped. Banners hung from every storefront. "Thank you, Clara. Millbrook's hero. We are sorry." But it was Thornfield Lane that made her cry. Her yard was full of people. Dozens of them, working together. Mr. Holloway was replacing her broken window, whistling as he walked. Mrs. Patterson was planting flowers along the walkway, actual flowers this time, instead of accusations. Children drew thank you messages in sidewalk chalk along her driveway. Someone had completely restored her garden, which had fallen into neglect during her time at the hospital. The herbs stood in neat rows, properly watered, carefully tended. Mayor Collins stood on her porch with a large frame under his arm. "Welcome home, Clara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Clara got out of the car slowly, overwhelmed by the scene before her. "What is all this?" she whispered. "It's an apology," Catherine Holloway said, stepping forward with Jake at her side. "And a thank you. And a promise that we'll do better. We want you to know you're part of this community," Thomas Reed added, Emma holding his hand. "You always have been. We were just too blind to see it." Mayor Collins presented the frame, a proclamation declaring October 15th as Clara Jensen Day in Millbrook, honoring her service and sacrifice. But Clara barely glanced at it. She was looking at the faces around her, really looking, for the first time without fear or suspicion or walls between them. "I don't need a day," she said softly. "I just need you to remember. Remember that different doesn't mean dangerous. Remember that fear makes us cruel. Remember that the people we push away might be the ones we need most." "We'll remember," Catherine promised. "We'll teach our children to remember." The CDC published their findings 6 months later. Clara's remedy, now called the Jensen Protocol, was being tested for use against similar infections worldwide. Clara refused all payment, asking only that the knowledge be made available to anyone who needed it. "My grandmother would have wanted that," she explained to the reporters who came calling. "Healing isn't about profit. It's about people." Millbrook changed too, in ways both small and profound. The elementary school invited Clara to teach a class on herbalism and natural remedies. Children who had once been warned away from her now visited her garden after school, learning the names of plants and their uses. "This is feverfew," Clara would explain, her hands gentle on the delicate leaves. "It helps with headaches. But you have to respect it. Too much of anything, even something natural, can be harmful." Grace's flower shop became a meeting place for anyone interested in learning traditional medicine. Once a month, Clara held workshops there, teaching people to make tinctures and salves, sharing the wisdom passed down through generations. The grey house at the end of Thornfield Lane was no longer a place of fear. Now it was a place of healing. People knocked on Clara's door with questions about their gardens, their health, their lives. And Clara always answered, always helped, always shared what she knew. Thomas Reed apologized privately, standing on her porch one evening with a pie his wife had baked. "I can't take back the things I said," he told her, shame making him unable to meet her eyes. "I can't undo the years of treating you like you were less than human. But I want you to know. Emma asks about you constantly. She says she wants to be like you when she grows up. A healer." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Tell her she can be anything she wants," she said gently. "But if she chooses to be a healer, I'd be honored to teach her." Mrs. Patterson took longer to come around, her pride a stubborn thing. But one day she appeared at Clara's door with a small plant in her hands, an olive tree seedling. "Olive branches," she said gruffly, not quite apologizing but getting close. "Heard they mean peace. Thought you might like one." Clara took the seedling with a smile. "I plant it by my front door," she said. "So everyone who comes here knows they're welcome." And she did. The olive tree grew slowly but steadily, just like the trust being rebuilt in Millbrook. A year after the outbreak, Millbrook held its first annual Jensen Protocol Day, though Clara had tried to get them to call it something else, anything else. "You can't name a day after yourself," she'd protested. "It's embarrassing." "You don't get a vote," Mayor Collins had replied with a grin. Democracy in action. The day featured health screenings, workshops on natural medicine, and a memorial service for the 3 children who hadn't survived, Marcus Thompson, Amy Jeong, and little Isaiah Martin. Clara stood with those families at the memorial, 3 trees planted in the town square, one for each child lost. "I'm sorry," she told Marcus's mother, Rachel Thompson, who stood holding a folded flag from her son's memorial service. "I'm so sorry I didn't get there in time." Rachel took Clara's hand, squeezing tightly. "You saved 12 others," she said, tears running down her face. 12 children who are alive because of you. Marcus would have liked that. He was always trying to help people. She paused, then added, "I want to learn what you do. The herbs, the remedies. I want to learn it all. So Marcus's death means something. So I can help the next time something like this happens." Clara pulled Rachel into a hug, both women crying for what was lost and what was saved and the strange, painful beauty of moving forward through grief. "I'll teach you," Clara promised. "Everything I know." And she did. Rachel became her first formal student, learning with an intensity born of loss and love. Within 6 months, 3 other people had joined them, including Jake Holloway's mother Catherine, who discovered she had a gift for understanding plants. "It's like they talk to you," Catherine marveled one day in Clara's garden, her hands gentle on a sage plant. "If you're quiet enough to listen." "That's exactly right," Clara said, smiling at her student. "That's what my grandmother taught me. Everything in nature has wisdom to share, if we're humble enough to learn." The old house on Thornfield Lane became known as the Jensen Center for Traditional Medicine. Clara still lived there, but now it was also a classroom, a clinic, a place where old knowledge and new science met and learned from each other. Dr. Chen visited regularly, collaborating with Clara on research, fascinated by the intersection of traditional remedies and modern medicine. "You're bridging a gap that's been growing for centuries," he told her during one visit, watching her teach a class of eager students. "This is important work, Clara. Really important." 3 years after the outbreak, Clara stood in her garden at midnight, harvesting feverfew by moonlight just as her grandmother had taught her. The town was quiet, peaceful, sleeping soundly with their children safe in their beds. She heard footsteps on the path and turned to see a teenage girl approaching hesitantly, Emma Reed, now 15, tall and confident and full of questions about the world. "My mom said you'd be out here," Emma said, coming to stand beside Clara. "Said you always harvest at midnight." "The plants are strongest then," Clara explained, showing Emma how to cut the stems cleanly. "At least, that's what my grandmother believed. Modern science might disagree, but I trust the old ways." "I want to learn," Emma said suddenly, intensely. "Everything. All of it. Will you teach me?" Clara looked at the girl. The same girl she'd saved twice now, first from fever as a child, then from the outbreak that had nearly taken her. She saw determination in Emma's eyes, and compassion, and that rare quality that can't be taught, the genuine desire to heal. "Your father," Clara started. "Wants me to be a doctor," Emma finished. "A real doctor," he says. "With a degree and everything." She paused. "But I told him you saved my life when the real doctors couldn't. I told him I want to be both kinds of healer. Old knowledge and new. Is that possible?" Clara felt something warm bloom in her chest, pride, hope, the satisfaction of seeing seeds planted long ago finally bearing fruit. "Yes," she said, placing a hand on Emma's shoulder. "That's exactly what the world needs. Healers who understand both languages, the language of science and the language of the earth. You can be both. You should be both." Emma's face lit up with a smile that rivaled the moonlight. "When can we start?" "Right now," Clara said, handing her the scissors. "Cut here, at an angle. Always thank the plant for its gift. Always leave enough so it can grow back stronger." They worked together in comfortable silence, teacher and student, continuing a tradition that stretched back through generations of women who had healed when others could not. As they harvested, Clara thought about her grandmother, who had pressed the leather journal into her hands and told her to be kind anyway. She thought about the years of loneliness, the whispered accusations, the fear in people's eyes when they looked at her. She thought about Catherine's desperate knock on her door, and the children's labored breathing in the hospital, and the moment Jake opened his eyes and called for his mother. She thought about the banners on Main Street, the olive tree by her door, the students who now filled her home with questions and laughter. And she understood, finally, what her grandmother had been trying to teach her all along. The kindness wasn't for them. It was for her. Being kind in the face of cruelty hadn't made her weak, it had made her strong enough to help when help was desperately needed. Refusing to harden her heart, even when they'd hardened theirs against her, had kept her human enough to see their humanity when fear made them forget their own. "What are you thinking about?" Emma asked, noticing Clara's distant expression. "I'm thinking," Clara said slowly, "that being different is only lonely if we let it be. That being feared is only powerful if we choose to use it for good. And that the people who hurt us can sometimes become the people who help us build something better." Emma considered this, her young face serious in the moonlight. "Like my dad," she said. "He was awful to you. And now he tells everyone you're the best person he knows." "Your father was scared," Clara said gently. "Fear makes people do things they regret. The brave thing is to admit when you were wrong and try to do better." "Did you forgive him?" Clara smiled. "I'm still working on it. Forgiveness isn't a moment, Emma. It's a practice. Some days are easier than others." They finished harvesting and carried their baskets inside, where Clara showed Emma how to bundle the herbs for drying, how to store them properly, how to record everything in a journal so the knowledge would never be lost. One day, Clara said, watching Emma's careful hands tie twine around a bundle of feverfew, "You'll pass this knowledge to someone else. Maybe your daughter, maybe a student, maybe a stranger who knocks on your door at midnight needing help. And they'll pass it on again. That's how we survive, not just as individuals, but as a community. By sharing what we know. By helping each other. Even when people are mean to you?" Emma asked. "Especially then," Clara said firmly. "Because that's when they need help the most. When people are cruel, it's usually because they're hurting. And hurt people need healers." Emma was quiet for a moment, then said, "I want to be like you when I grow up." Clara's eyes filled with tears, the good kind, the kind that comes from joy so pure it has to overflow. "Be better than me," she said, hugging the girl close. "Learn from my mistakes. Stand up for yourself sooner. Don't wait years to let people in. Be both strong and soft, both wise and willing to learn. Be exactly who you are, and don't apologize for it." "Did you apologize for who you were?" "For too long," Clara admitted. "I let their fear make me small. I let their words make me doubt myself. I hid my light because it made them uncomfortable. Don't do that, Emma. The world needs your light, even if, especially if, it makes some people uncomfortable." 10 years after the outbreak, Clara Jensen stood at the podium in the Millbrook Town Hall, surrounded by faces she knew by name. The hall was packed, standing room only, but this time it was for celebration, not fear. They were dedicating the new Community Health Center, a beautiful building that combined traditional medicine with modern healthcare. One wing was for doctors and nurses and all the miracles of contemporary science. The other wing was for herbalists and healers and the wisdom of generations past. Above the entrance, a plaque read, "Jensen Center for Integrative Health, where all knowledge is welcome." "I'm not good at speeches," Clara began, her voice stronger now, more confident than it had been a decade ago. "But I want to say thank you. Thank you for giving me a second chance. Thank you for being brave enough to admit when you were wrong. Thank you for showing your children that it's never too late to change, to grow, to become better than you were." She looked out at the crowd, at Catherine, now a certified herbalist who worked alongside her, at Rachel Thompson, who had turned her grief into purpose and now ran support groups for families dealing with loss. At Thomas Reed, who taught workshops on unlearning prejudice, at Mrs. Patterson, who had become one of Clara's fiercest defenders and best friends, at Dr. Chen, who had co-authored 3 papers with Clara on integrative medicine, at Maya Collins, who had turned Millbrook into a model community for tolerance and inclusion. And there, in the front row, sat Emma Reed, now 25 years old, wearing the white coat of a medical doctor and the embroidered shawl of a traditional healer. She had just completed her residency and was coming home to work at the new center, bridging both worlds just as Clara had taught her. "You called me a witch," Clara continued, her voice steady. "And maybe, in the old sense of the word, I am. A woman who knows plants, who speaks to the earth, who heals with hands and heart. But I learned something important through all of this: we're all a little bit magic. Every person who chooses kindness over cruelty, who offers help instead of judgment, who sees the humanity in someone they don't understand, that's magic too. That's the real power." She paused, letting her words settle over the crowd. The story people will tell about this town isn't about a plague that killed 3 children. It's about a community that learned to see past fear, that chose love over hate, that saved 12 children and countless others by opening their minds and hearts. That's the story I want told. Not the story of Clara the witch, but the story of Millbrook the brave. The applause was thunderous, but Clara barely heard it. She was looking at Emma, who was wiping tears from her eyes and smiling that brilliant smile. After the ceremony, as people mingled and celebrated, Grace found Clara standing by the window, looking out at the town that had changed so much. "You did this," Grace said, linking her arm through Clara's. "You changed everything." "No," Clara corrected gently. "We did this. All of us together. I just planted the seeds. Everyone else helped them grow." "Still," Grace insisted. "They called you a witch, Clara. And you saved them all anyway." Clara smiled, thinking about her grandmother, about the leather journal that now sat in the new center's library for anyone to study, about the chain of knowledge that stretched back through time and forward into a future she had helped create. "They called me a witch," she agreed. "But what they meant was different. And what I learned was that different isn't dangerous, fear is. Ignorance is. Refusing to learn and grow and change is. But different. Different is just another word for special. For unique. For necessary." She turned to face her friend, her eyes bright with tears and triumph and the quiet joy of a life well lived. "They called me a witch," she said again, softer this time. "But I was always just Clara. And Clara was always enough." Outside, children played in the garden Clara had designed for the new center, a teaching garden where every plant had a purpose and a story. Their laughter drifted through the open windows, the sound of a future built on the foundations of hard-learned lessons and hard-won grace. The sun set over Millbrook, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, and Clara felt her grandmother's presence like a warm hand on her shoulder. "Be kind anyway," the wind seemed to whisper. Be kind anyway. And she had been. Despite everything, through everything, because of everything, she had been. The witch who saved them all had taught them the greatest magic of all, that healing begins not with herbs or medicine, but with the courage to see each other clearly, to admit when we are wrong, to choose love over fear, and to offer help even to those who once hurt us. That was the real miracle. That was the story worth telling. And it started, as all good stories do, with one person who refused to let the darkness win, who kept her light burning, even when the whole town tried to blow it out. Thank you for watching. They called her a witch, but she was the one who saved them all. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this story to help others find it. Comment below with your thoughts. What did this story mean to you? Have you ever been judged unfairly? Have you ever had to choose between bitterness and kindness? Subscribe for more stories that explore the human heart and the choices that define us. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that being different is a gift, not a curse. What was your favorite moment in Clara's journey? Let me know in the comments.